Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 1990 Pontiac 6000 SE Wagon. Up front is a 3.1 liter V6, and down below is a 4-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Pontiac 6000 because I've never driven a 6000 before. I've driven other A-body cars like the Buick Century, and I've even driven a Buick Century Wagon that shares a lot with this car, but never the 6000. The 6000 was kind of the redheaded stepchild of the A-body run just because there's so few of them, and this one, the SE, in the wagon format, was actually one of only a few hundred. And so today we're going to be taking a look at this kind of rare Pontiac station wagon from the late 80s and early 90s. But if you'd like to submit your own vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. And if you'd like to see all my videos weeks or sometimes months in advance, you can head on over to my Patreon for only $5 a month. But let's get back to that 3.1 liter V6. Well, that was a relatively new engine for this year of 1990. The all-wheel drive used it in the late 80s, but this was the first year that the Wagon got it for 1990, and it's a relatively good engine. We saw this in a lot of other Pontiacs. The 3400. This engine was basically an evolution of the 2.8 liter that came before it, and so I've never had a problem with them. I think they deliver a good enough amount of power, but they're not quite race cars. Like I said, paired to it is a 4-speed automatic because every GM product from the 1990s ran off of 4-speed automatics, and the Pontiac 6000 is no different. Last but not least, this is front-wheel drive. However, in the late 80s, you could find Pontiac 6000s that were all-wheel drive. They are incredibly hard to find today, and what's even harder to find today is parts for them, but they did make an all-wheel drive version of the Pontiac 6000, which I thought was so neat. How does it feel to drive the Pontiac 6000 wagon? Obviously, it drives like its siblings, the Buick Century and the Chevy Celebrity. However, this one actually has ERC, which is electronic ride control, which is basically air suspension in the back to level out in case you have kids in the back. We'll talk about this. This technically is a 3-row. So that does help out a little bit. And this does have the optional sport exhaust. And so this is the factory sound. It's not the worst in the world. That's the original exhaust. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior because it's very 90s in here. Well, in front of me, I have a bunch of gauges and dials and switches. Off to the far left, we have our driver information. This is going to be your warning lights. This is before warning lights were kind of standardized. So very nice to see this here. Then we have our speedometer. Then we have the tachometer off to the right. We have our fuel, temperature, oil, and battery voltage all lined up. I absolutely adore this. I think it looks so cool, so space agey. I feel like I'm flying an SR-71 with all these gauges looking back at me. And although I'm not, at least I feel that way. On the steering wheel, we don't get an airbag. However, we do have horn buttons. And off to the left, we have a climate control vent, headlight switch, and our fog lamps on and off. Moving on to the door, we do have manual mirrors up top. Latch you get in and out, and then power windows down below that are having a rough go of things. Moving into the center, again, we get those gauges across, but then we get 2 more climate vents. We get our climate controls off to the left. Very nice to see this. Rear defrost. Rear wiper. This does have a rare optional rear wiper. Then we do have the radio. This is actually a radio out of a newer Pontiac, so this is not original to the car, but it is a now still vintage Pontiac radio. Then we do have a ashtray. We do have a cubby right here. I guess you could think of it as a cup holder. It's not, but we don't get any cup holders here in the Pontiac 6000, so it fails the big friggin' bottle test. Then we have the shifter, and we have our power seat adjustments. What's kind of funny is that only the driver's seat is power, so it takes up this center console space. The passenger can just adjust your seat as you're driving along. I don't think I'd love that, but that's something that they could do. Then we do get a center console and the seats. The seats are so incredibly comfortable. GM knew what they were doing. They built the best seats of the 90s, and they are here in the Pontiac 6000. It is just simply the best. However, we do have more than another row of seats, so let's talk about all the seats here in the Pontiac 6000. If you can hear, I'm going to try to amplify the audio. That is the air compressor for the rear suspension to level it out, because I got in the back, and it also does it whenever the car is shut off. It'll actually do it for quite some time. So it's kind of cool to hear that. However, you can't actually access the air compressor like later Pontiacs let you do to then use it for tools or inflating things. That's a sealed system. You can't access it. Once we are back here, I'm 5'11", not a small guy, and I fit back here really, really well. I do have power windows. I have a latch to get in and out, and plenty of headspace, plenty of leg room. I could fit back here and ride across the country back here in a lot of comfort. And that's very, very nice to see and feel. These back seats are great. We do have an ashtray in the center, and that's it. It's a lovely, lovely back seat from GM in 1990. And I wouldn't mind sitting back here, which as a big guy, it's not always easily said about cars of this size or cars of this era. So very, very nice. However, I do have one more seating option. So let's hop into the trunk and talk about the cargo space as well as the rear facing third row. All right, coming around the back of the Pontiac 6000 SE, you can hear the compressor still going. However, we can open up this glass on its own. The strut doesn't really work, but you can open this up. However, you can open up the full tailgate. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. That is the rear-facing third row. Now, something that I find absolutely hilarious is that this was meant for your kids. I think we can all agree that the third row was for the youngest of siblings to get motion sick. A lot of us grew up with them. Very fun. So keeping in mind that this is geared towards children sitting back here, they have their own ashtray. So don't worry. Jimmy and Susie, age 6 and 8, can also smoke a dart while going down the Garden State Parkway. All the bases covered here in the Pontiac 6000. I absolutely love it. We do get the spare tire. It is held under here, and I can step in. We got a leaf. And here I am in the third rear-facing row of the Pontiac 6000. Not super comfy. But also, actually, you know what? I could sit up relatively straight. My head's not hitting the ceiling. I could fit back here. You could put adults back here. It's not a great look to put grandma in the trunk at the supermarket, but I guess she would probably be the one actually utilizing the ashtray. I find that hilarious. We do get a light back here, which is very nice. Oh, it does work. Look at that. Nice little light. So I can do some light reading, pun intended, and whatnot. So here's the third row of a Pontiac 6000. I'm not going to close this because I don't believe that there is a mechanism to open it from the inside, and I would be trapped, which is not good. But speaking of the inside, let's talk about the outside. Now we got to talk about the looks. Obviously, it's white on white, which I love. This is so characteristic of the 90s, especially with the added roof box. The owner, Spencer, did put the roof box on it. And for that extra added 90s dead company effect, this does have, this is a Sears roof box, another company that no longer really exists. So really cool to see that. Overall, just the way this wagon looks is so iconically 90s, but it's not an iconically 90s car that you see all that much. You don't see Pontiac 6000s all the time. And so that's why I was so excited to drive this specific one, and I love it. This has just been so cool. It looks visually very good, and it does differentiate itself a little bit from the other A bodies. It doesn't feel like they literally just glued the Pontiac badge over the Buick badge. It feels like this was styled a little bit differently, and that's nice to see. Is it dramatic? Not really, but it works well, and it's so 90s. With all of this being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving a 1990 Pontiac 6000 SE? Well, it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. These cars have so much charm. GM front-wheel drive cars from the 80s, 90s, and into the early 2000s had charm. Now, GM was doing good and also doing bad and all over the place. But the cars were full of charm, they were full of character, they were full of life. This feels like a happy individual. However, I have to say, this car does feel like it's being pulled in several directions. It's a wagon, so it's a family vehicle. However, it got the V6 and the electronic ride control and the SE package, which has some really, really cool ground effects, body kit on it and things like that. So it's also trying to be sporty while also being the family car. That name 6000, kind of like a European-inspired thing. The Lumina of the same era had a Euros package that you could do. So these were trying to fight with the Euro cars. European cars were becoming more and more popular in the United States, but also Japanese cars were starting to become more and more popular in the United States. So this was also fighting with like the Accord and vehicles like that. This car does feel like it's pulled in a lot of different directions and like it's trying to cover a lot of different bases. It's trying to be good at everything, and it ends up being pretty decent. It rides fine, drives fine, has fine enough features. It kind of ends up falling somewhere in the middle. However, it feels dynamic and it actually has a personality. Think of your best friend, or think of your partner, or your mom, or your dad, or a buddy, whoever it might be. Real life people are very three-dimensional. What makes them angry one day might not always make them angry another day. People get hungry and it changes their mood. People have issues and trauma and scars. And so no one's perfect and no one is as predictable as you might hope them to be. That's how this car feels. This car feels very alive because it's predictable to a point, but not 100% predictable. It's not 100% one thing. Yes, it's a wagon, but it has sporty exhausts and the big engine. Yes, it has a sporty exhaust and big engine, but it has a weird, funky name and odd features. It has the gauge cluster seemingly from a fighter jet. It's comfortable, but it's also not as big as the other cars that they were making. And that's what gives this car character. Because it has pitfalls, because it has good days and bad days. And it's cars like this that I can associate to myself. I have good days and bad days. I have many different interests that don't always intersect with one another. And that's what cars of the 90s were. They just felt human. This doesn't feel like 3,500 pounds of metal, rubber, and glass. This feels like a buddy. This feels like a high school friend. This feels like growing up in the Midwest. That's why I love these cars so much. And this car is so perfect in showing that. This is a swan song for the 1990s traveling American. Throw the kids in the back, give them a pack of cigarettes. Don't give them a pack of cigarettes, but you could. There's an ashtray. Throw the kids in the back, cigarette or cigarette-less, and go on a road trip. That's what this car was for, and now it feels like just an old friend. Speaking of old friends, huge thank you to Spencer for letting me borrow his Pontiac 6000. What an amazing vehicle, an amazing treat to get to drive around. Spencer is a connoisseur of GM front-wheel drive vehicles. He actually runs the GM front-wheel drive Facebook group. Spencer is such a wonderful friend and also a wonderful curator of special vehicles, and this is his latest acquisition, and I have to say it might be one of his best. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.